So Percy Schmeiser is a farmer and former mayor from Bruno, Saskatchewan. He's well known across Canada as a promoter of farmers' rights. And Percy's canola fields were contaminated with Monsanto's Roundup-ready canola. He took Monsanto to the Supreme Court after Monsanto sued him for allegedly using their product without purchasing it. And while the Supreme Court rules against him 5-4 in an out-of-court settlement finalized in March 2008, Monsanto agreed to pay the cleanup costs of Percy's fields. There was a no-gag order on the settlement, and it was agreed that Monsanto could be sued again if further contamination occurred. Yay! And Percy and his wife Louise have won the Right Livelihood Award in 2007. Well deserved. So welcome to Victoria, Percy Schmeiser.
First of all, good evening to everyone. I'd like to start to thank the people, the organizers, and the organizations that have brought my wife, Louise, and myself here to British Columbia, and also tonight here to Victoria. There are so many issues that arise with the introduction of GMOs or GEs. I always like to refer to it as GMOs. And also the whole issue, what has happened to people not only in North America, but throughout the world wherever GMOs were introduced. As mentioned, I come from the, well, I should say, start first, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you from the prairies, and especially my province of Saskatchewan. I come from a little town east of Saskatoon in the heart of the grain-growing area, and often I think how fortunate we are there to be able to grow so many different types of crops. And we often refer to our area east of the city of Saskatoon as God's country, because we've been able to, and so fortunate to have continuous good crops through many, many years. Now, besides being a farmer, I've been also involved in many other things in my life. I've been mayor of my community, but most of all, my wife and I were known on the prairies, and especially in Saskatchewan, as seed developers and seed savers. And seed developers in canola, where we were developing new varieties of seeds plants suitable for climatic and soil conditions, and seed savers using our seed from year to year like thousands of farmers do every year around the world. Seed savers, seed developers. I was also mayor of my community for over 25 years, and besides that I was also an MLA, province of Saskatchewan, and in my position as an MLA I was on many, many agricultural committees representing my province, and also my province in the federal level, and agricultural policies, rules, laws, regulations, so on. And so I always thought that I worked hard for rules and laws that would benefit farmers. So that gives you a brief background. Now, GMOs were introduced into Canada and the United States at exactly the same time, 1996. And at that time, there were 4 crops introduced. That was cotton, soya, corn, and canola. And canola really affected us the most in Western Canada, plus a little bit on soybeans. So 4 crops introduced at that time. Now, as I said before, there are so many issues that arise when you introduce GMOs: the environmental issue, the food issue, the control of farmers, biodiversity, and so on. So I'll try and concentrate on a few which I think will affect you if you ever introduce GMOs here in British Columbia, and especially on Vancouver Island. 4 crops, as I mentioned, and they were introduced in 1996. 1998, Monsanto laid a lawsuit, a patent infringement lawsuit against my wife and myself, and they said we were growing their GMO canola without a license from them. And that was quite a shock to us because we had never bought Monsanto seed. We didn't even know at that time anybody from Monsanto. And we were very concerned that possibly our developed canola seed, our research and development, was now contaminated with GMOs from Monsanto. And so we stood up to Monsanto. We said, if you have contaminated any of our seed, you should be liable for the damages you have done and 50 years of research and development. So patent laws in most countries of the world, including Canada, come under federal jurisdiction. So we had no choice on where the case would be heard. So it was Federal Court of Canada and with one judge. And how often my wife and I wished we could have a judge and jury with farmers on that knew and understood farming, but that was not to be. One judge. And in the 2 years of pre-trial, Monsanto admitted they had never had any evidence that we had ever bought their seed. But they said it didn't matter. They had contaminated us, and that by true patent law, they now owned our seeds and plants through the contamination. So that was the basis it went to court. Now, at the court, what the judge ruled is what made the case become internationally known throughout the world, because it was the first case on patent infringement in regards to higher life forms. Now, when I use the term higher life forms this evening, I mean basically anything that comes from a seed. So this is what the judge ruled, and it was 2.5 weeks of trial. He ruled, number one, it does not matter how a farmer is contaminated by GMOs, and he went on to specify, first of all, cross-pollination by wind, birds, bees, and so on. Or if you are contaminated by direct seed movement, with seeds blown in the wind, or transportation by farmers, processing, and so on. And if that happens, you no longer own your seeds or plants. They become the ownership of Monsanto through patent law. So you can imagine how that startled the world. He also went on to say that my wife and I were not allowed to use our seeds or plants again because of the contamination. All our seeds and plants and all the profit from our 1998 crop also goes to Monsanto because of the contamination. We had 1,030 acres seeded in 1998. So the judge said, all that profit, all the research, all the development goes to Monsanto. So that was quite a blow to us. And further, he ruled, it does not matter what the rate of contamination is in your field. If it's 1% or 2% or 5%, it does not matter. It all becomes the ownership of Monsanto. So what I'm saying here this evening, if you are contaminated as a farmer, if you're an organic farmer, you could wake up tomorrow morning and be the same as us, no longer own your seeds or plants, and you cannot basically farm organically again if your seeds are contaminated. So that was the ruling. And so we appealed it then to the Federal Court of Canada, and I'll fast track. It eventually went to the Supreme Court of Canada. And we were very fortunate that the Supreme Court of Canada accepted to hear the case. And after losing twice in the lower courts, it's very seldom that the Supreme Court of Canada will hear the case. So there was a great victory even at that time that the Supreme Court ruled to hear the case. Now, in all the Federal Court of Appeal, they only addressed facts of law or points of law, and we could not bring any other items in. But in the Supreme Court, we had the ability or the privilege to bring other items that we felt were important when the case went before the Supreme Court, besides patent infringement. And some of those issues were this, and I think they were very important. Now, and I won't read them all, but number one was, can farmers' right to grow conventional or organic crops be protected? That was one of them. Number two, can farmers keep the ancient right to save and use their own seed from year to year if they so desire? And the third issue, by that time, after 7 years of battle, was this. We said, who owns life? Has any corporation, any individual, to be able to put a patent on life and control life. We said to the Supreme Court, life is sacred, and no one should have the right to control life, whether you're an individual or you're in a corporation. So those are the items that went before the Supreme Court. Now, this is what the Supreme Court ruled. First of all, Monsanto by that time wanted over $1 million from us, license fees, punitive damage, and many other fees, their legal fees, and so on. And so it would have been a major disaster if we would have lost. But the Supreme Court ruled that we didn't have to pay Monsanto $1. But what was not right, the Supreme Court ruled that Monsanto pays their legal bill, we have to pay our legal bill. And remember, Monsanto laid the lawsuit against us. They started or initiated the lawsuit. So our legal bill was over $400,000. Monsanto's legal bill was over $2 million. And you may ask why ours $400,000, Monsanto's $2 million. They at one time had 19 lawyers in court. We had one lawyer. Talk about intimidation. So that was not fair, because it's a lot easier for a corporation, a $1 billion corporation or more, to pay $2 million for a test case versus a farmer to stand up for his rights to pay $400,000. And so that was not fair. Now, on the issue of who owns life, this is what the Supreme Court ruling was and is still in effect today. Monsanto's patent on a gene is valid, and wherever that gene arrives in any higher life form, they own and control that higher life form. Now just reason that out. If you own the gene or control and own a higher life form in a seed or plant, what about a bird, bee, animal, or even a human being? So if they insert a gene by whatever method, or a gene that they have a patent enters your body, does that say they own you or they own me? So now we have more questions than answers in Canada. But the Supreme Court also said it has to go back to the Parliament of Canada, first of all, to give rights back to farmers. Secondly, the whole issue that life should not be able to be patented. And eventually, I'm sure it'll become before the Parliament of Canada. I think that Monsanto at that time thought they had a great victory. But I think now it has come home to haunt them. Because if you own and control a higher life form and you release it into the environment like a seed or plant, as farmers, and everybody knows, you cannot control it through cross-pollination, seeds blown in the wind or whatever. So now we have the liability issue. So what has happened since then? 2005, we were watching our fields very closely, and we again noticed we were contaminated, or we thought we were contaminated with Monsanto's GMO canola again. We did some testing ourselves, and we felt very strongly it was their GMO canola again in one of our fields, and it was a very small field. It was only about 50 acres, which we were developing to do new mustard research. We notified Monsanto, and the reason why we notified Monsanto was because all through all the trials, they said all a farmer had to do, or anybody had to do, if they thought they were contaminated by Monsanto's GMOs, to notify Monsanto, and they would come out and take care of it, or check to see if it was their GMOs. We did this, and indeed Monsanto did come out, and after 2 days they notified us and said, yes, indeed, it is their GMO canola on our field again. And they asked us what we wanted to have done. And we said to Monsanto, my wife and I said to Monsanto, we want every one of those canola plants pulled out by hand on a 50-acre field, and they agreed to do this. 2 days later, my wife gets an email or a fax. And if I've ever seen her upset in my life, that was one time, because in that email it stated, before we remove those GMO plants, our GMO plants, from the field, you have to sign this release form. And in that release form, you won't believe what it said. First of all, my wife, myself, or any member of our family could never ever take Monsanto to court for the rest of our lives, no matter how much they contaminated us in the future. And the other issue was, in the release, there was a number of them, but I'll just tell you the two important ones, was that we were not, it was a gag order, we were not allowed to talk to anyone. I couldn't even talk to you here tonight or to the press what the terms of settlement were, that they were going to remove the plants from our field. And we said to Monsanto, there is no way we're ever going to give our freedom of speech and expression away to a corporation. So So Monsanto said to us, if you don't sign the release, we will not remove the plants. But remember, those plants on your field are our property. And I said, if it's your property, get them off our field. But they refused to do it, so my wife and I we hired some of our neighbors, and we then removed the plants ourselves. And we notified Monsanto at the time we were doing it. And then Monsanto had the audacity and said, we'd like to remind you, you have our property, and you're not free to do with them what you want. So anyway, we sent Monsanto the bill for removing the plants. It came to $620, and Monsanto refused to pay it. So then we went to small claims court. And so the judge agreed with us and issued Monsanto a patent, plus now it was $640 because there was $20 court cost. So in March of this year, it went to court, and 2 minutes before the trial started, or the court started, Monsanto paid us the $640. Now, it is not the issue of the $640 or $600,000. It was now that Monsanto accepted liability. And it set a precedent now, so if a farmer, if you're an organic farmer, conventional farmer, no matter where in the world, and it doesn't only apply to Monsanto, it could be Bayer, Syngenta, DuPont, and so on. If you are contaminated, now there's an avenue for anybody to go after the corporation on liability. And believe me, after 10 years of legal battle, it was a tremendous victory. And as I said, not only for ourselves, but for farmers and people around the world against these corporations. Another issue I'd like to talk about tonight to you, and it's an issue that's very hot in Europe. My wife and I have just come back last week from Russia and from Germany. Is the issue of contamination and coexistence. If you introduce GMOs, it doesn't matter what crop it's in, there is no such thing as coexistence. It's a dominant gene, and it will take over whatever seed or plant it gets into and render all that variety GMOs. So there is no such thing as coexistence. Choice is gone, and eventually that crop becomes all GMOs. There is no such thing. Number two, there is no such thing as containment. You cannot contain pollen flow. I don't care how big a buffer strip you leave. If it's 1 kilometer or 50, whatever, you cannot contain it. Seeds will blow in the wind. It'll be carried by animals. It'll be carried or passed through birds, ducks, geese, and so on. So there is no such thing as containment. How bad is it now on the prairies? We no longer have pure canola seed left on the prairies. It now is all GMOs. We no longer have pure soya. It is now all GMOs. So those are two crops organic farmers no longer can raise on the prairies, soya and canola. Now, that not only affects those two crops, but remember, canola comes from the brassica family. It's got very close cousins, radishes, turnips, cauliflower, and others, and also distant cousins like mustard or wild mustard and close cousin mustard. Those crops now through cross-pollination are also becoming GMOs, making more crops or market garden crops organic farmers or conventional farmers no longer can raise. So again, it takes your choice away and your freedom of what the choice you want in raising crops. So those are some of the issues that arise when you introduce GMOs. There are many, many other issues. I won't go into the food issue because I don't have enough time, but we do now know, after 12 years of GMOs, it's no longer what can happen or may happen, but now what has happened with the introduction of GMOs. It's just like when a new drug is introduced. It takes 5, 6 years, or maybe not even that long, to see what the side effects are. We now have seen the side effects of GMOs. 1996, farmers were told this: increased yields, more nutritious, but most of all, I think what caught the farmer's ear was less chemical use. Believe me now, the yields have gone down, 15% at least in soya, 10% at least in canola. But worst of all, we have a massive increased use of chemicals. You'll have 3 to 5 times more use of chemicals than ever before. And these chemicals now are more toxic and more powerful than ever before. Roundup, herbicide from Monsanto, now is at least 4 times stronger than it was in 1996. And the reason why the chemicals are stronger now is because new super weeds, new super GMO weeds have developed through the introduction of GMOs. And these super weeds have spread throughout our whole Western Canada. They're not only in canola fields, they're in wheat fields and barley fields. They're in our towns, they're in our cities, at our universities, cemeteries, golf courses, which now the municipalities, the towns and cities have a new expense to try and control this new superweed. You may ask, what is a new superweed? It's a regular conventional canola plant that through cross-pollination has taken on the genes of at least 3-4 companies besides Monsanto with the introduction of GMOs. So the GMOs from 3 or 4 different companies are now in one conventional canola plant, making it this new superweed. So that has happened to us with the introduction of GMOs. So a massive increased use of chemicals. You cannot have GMOs without a massive increased use of chemicals. And remember what they said in 1996? Less chemicals. Another thing they said, now we'd always have sustainable agriculture. Now we'll be able to feed a hungry world. Well, if anything will happen with the introduction of GMOs is that we'll have more hunger in the world and more starvation because of reduced yields and poor quality. GMO food or seeds or plants have half, in many cases half the nutritional value of conventional or organic food. So that's another important issue. There are many other issues I could go into, but I think another issue that you never ever hear about with the introduction of GMOs is the control of people, the control of consumers, the control of farmers. And I think I'd like to touch on that, and I think I have enough time for that. I have in my hand here a Monsanto contract. It's one of the later ones. And I won't go all what's in there, but some of the main points. Number one, farmer always has to buy his seed from Monsanto. A farmer also can never use his own seed. He must buy the chemicals from Monsanto. He must pay Monsanto $15 an acre license fee each year. One of the worst clauses is that he must permit Monsanto's police force to come on his land for 3 years after he signs that contract. Their police can go into a farmer's field without permission. They can go in farmers' granaries. They can get his tax records, his farming records, without a farmer's permission. So who are Monsanto's police on the prairies? They are former RCMP officers based in Saskatoon. And not only that, but a new clause for 2008 is no matter if something happens to your crop, you can never ever take Monsanto to court for a claim against Monsanto. You give your right up to make Monsanto to court. And not another clause is, if something happens to your crop or you committed some violation of the crop, Monsanto can make you destroy your crop, they can take all the profit from your crop, and you must sign a non-disclosure statement that you can never talk to your neighbor or the press what they have done to you. Talk about freedom of speech in Canada. I, as a former politician, never thought this could happen to us in Canada. I'm not talking about a third world country. I'm talking about U.S. and Canada. Another issue, and I think these are important issues, a brochure from Monsanto in our local newspapers, and even in some cases in the U.S., they advertise on the radio. And this is what it says. If you think your neighbor is growing Monsanto's GMOs without a license from us, inform us. Tell us what, inform on your neighbor. And if your neighbor happens to do that, they will reward the neighbor with either a free leather jacket or chemicals. And when Monsanto gets this tip or rumor, they immediately send 2 of their own investigators out, or personnel, to a farmer's home. And what happens is not very nice. They'll say to a farmer or his wife that we have this tip or rumor you're growing our GMOs without a license. And a farmer will say, we're organic farmers, we're conventional farmers, we've never bought your seed. And Monsanto will say, you're lying, if you don't confess, we'll take you to court, and believe me, you won't have a farm left. So what happens after these gene police, as we call them, leave a farmer's home? A farmer will think, well, was it this neighbor or this neighbor over here or over here that has caused me this trouble? Now you have a suspicion. You have the breakdown of our world social fabric. Farmers not talking together. Farmers scared to work together because who has done that to them? So now we have a division, or what we call divide and conquer. And that's exactly what Monsanto wants. And I often think in our own family, in my own family, my grandparents came to this country at the turn of the century. And my grandparents and my parents had to work together with our neighbors to build our infrastructure, our schools, hospitals, churches, and so on. Now we have that breakdown of our world social fabric. And I think that is one of the worst things that could have happened with the introduction of GMOs, that breakdown of our world social fabric. And through Monsanto's policies and their gene police. I never mentioned it on the tour so far, but I think I should show something else here. Farmers call these extortion letters. We don't know how many thousands of these letters have been sent out to farmers. And in it states, and this generally happens if they can't find a farmer at home, and in it states, we have reason to believe that you might be growing Monsanto's GMO, canola, soybeans, or whatever the case, without a license from us. We estimate you have 200 acres, 500 acres of our GMOs. And in lieu of us not taking you to court, send us $200,000, $100,000 in 2 weeks' time, and we may or may not take you to court because we think you might be growing GMOs. Can you imagine the fear in a farm family when they get a letter like this from a multi-billion-dollar corporation, send us $100,000, $200,000 in a few weeks' time because we think you might be growing our GMOs? I've seen one letter with $1.5 million sent to a farmer. This, talk about extortion. And in it, it states right here, you're not allowed to show this letter to anyone or we will fine you. So talk about freedom of speech. So those are the other things that happen with the introduction of GMOs, the total suppression of farmers' freedom of speech and expression. So there's a lot more to the whole issue of GMOs. It's the total control of the seed supply, and that's what it's all about. It was never about increased production or more nutritious. It was control of the seed supply and then the food supply. Another thing that they do to farmers, if a farmer is not home, or they'll go to the local municipality and get the farmer's land location. They'll then use a helicopter or a small plane and they'll fly over a canola field and generally our fields are 160 acres, and they'll drop a Monsanto herbicide spray bomb onto the center of a farmer's field, and it normally covers about 30 feet across. 10 or 12 days later, they'll fly over after the chemical Roundup has time to activate. If the field or if the spot where they hit with the chemicals has died, they know the farmer was not using Monsanto's GMOs. If the canola has not died, they know the farmer was using Monsanto's GMOs. Then you can know what will happen. A farmer will get a lawsuit. But those are the things that they've been doing. Is it legal? Absolutely not. And if you go to the police say you lay a charge, and then you're in court maybe for 4 years, 5 years, $200,000-$300,000 to stand up for your legal bill. So those are some of the things that happened with the introduction of GMOs. There is absolutely no benefit up to this point in time with GMOs introduction. A good thing is that we've had now GMOs for 12 years. There has been no new GMOs allowed into Canada in the last 12 years because farmers have seen what has happened with the four that were introduced in 1996. They wanted to introduce GMO wheat, rice, flax, and alfalfa, and they were not allowed. And another important thing is they wanted to introduce the terminator gene back 3 years ago. And the terminator gene, as referred to before, is a gene that's put into the seed. When the seed becomes a plant, the seeds from that plant are sterile and will not reproduce. Now, the danger of the terminator gene also is it can cross-pollinate into indigenous seeds, into organic farmers' crops, and render all those seeds sterile also. To me, it's the greatest assault on life that we've ever seen on this planet, where seeds are introduced or tried to be introduced at a sterile. Terminator gene can be installed in any higher life form, whether it's a bird, bee, animal, even a human being. So look at the importance if that terminator gene was ever introduced. The Canadian government was promoting the terminator gene as early as 3 years ago in Asian countries, that the Asian people, especially in Thailand, in Africa, so that the farmers would be forced to buy their seed each year because the seeds from those plants would be sterile. So as I said, it was absolutely criminal that this was even developed. Who owns the terminator gene? 50% by Monsanto and 50% by the U.S. government. That who owns the terminator gene. So those are some of the issues that I thought are important to you. If it's ever introduced, some of the greatest contamination in the prairies came from not farmers growing it initially, it came from test plots and research stations from the government and companies like Monsanto. It was not easy for my wife and I to stand up to Monsanto. They did everything possible to destroy us, and that's why we had many lawsuits against us besides the initial one. And I remember that one time, about 4 years into the case, they launched another lawsuit of $1 million. They wanted their legal bills paid, license fee, and so on, and they up to that point. And they said, because my wife and I were stubborn, because we were arrogant, and because we didn't know what Monsanto wanted, they brought this here other lawsuit against us. So we had to go to court and fight that. They then tried to seize our house. They tried to seize our farm equipment. They tried to seize all our land. They put liens and caveat because we couldn't borrow any more money to fight them. So we had to fight them every inch of the way. And one time in South Africa, when my wife and I were speaking at the Parliament in Cape Town, we met one of Monsanto's reps coming out of the assembly. And he shook his fist in my wife's face and my face and said, nobody stands up to Monsanto. We're going to get you and we're going to destroy you somehow, someday. So you can imagine the threats that we lived under. They would watch us when we worked in our fields, especially in the year 2000, 2001, all day long. or if my neighbors were helping me, they'd sit on the road and watch us what we were doing. They'd come into our yard and watch what my wife would do, sit in our driveway all day long. She would receive phone calls, you better watch it, they're going to get you. So they tried to just intimidate us and break us down mentally and financially. So many, many times, I forgot to mention this to you, that when these gene police would come out to a farmer's home, we'd get phone calls from farm women, hundreds of them, and crying on the phone and saying, Monsanto's police have been here. They threaten us. We won't have a farm left. What should we do? And so we'd always try and advise them where they could get legal help and so they could protect themselves. So those are some of the things that have happened. And they even went to our neighbors and said, if you support Percy and Louise Schmeiser, we're going to come after you and we're going to do to you the same thing that we've done to them. So those are the threats that we lived under. And I'll tell you, it was 7 years of living hell, and we wish that not to happen to anyone. And yet there's hundreds and hundreds of farmers in North America went through, and they just through this and just capitulated to Monsanto and gave up and paid Monsanto whatever they wanted. The average settlement of 100 farmers that were documented in the U.S. was over $150,000. So some of the settlements was $2 million by farmers, which totally destroyed them and bankrupt. In my opinion, they are the most ruthless and deceitful company on the face of the earth, and they'll do anything to get control of the seed supply. And that's what it's all about, control of the seed supply and food supply. Why did my wife and I really stand up to Monsanto in 1998? There was a number of reasons. We felt that a farmer always should have the right to use a seed from year to year, and also that a farmer should have the right to develop new seeds and plants for his local conditions, climate conditions, soil conditions, and so on. Louise and I were developing new varieties of canola east of Saskatoon, suitable for the central part of Saskatchewan. Maybe if we would have went to Manitoba or Montana or Alberta, the seed may not have done as well. And that's why we said that in the seed business, one glove does not fit all. And that's why we felt it was so important that farmers always have the right to develop new seeds and plants for his region. Another concern we had as seed developers, if you ever get down to one variety of seeds or plant in a certain species, and you have something happen like a disease, a blight, or some disaster, you got nothing to fall back on. And we were very concerned about that. The other issue, my wife and I have 5 children. We got 15 grandchildren, and we have 1 great-grandchild. And we looked at what kind of a future do we want to leave to the future generations, our children, our grandchildren. Do we want land, food, seeds, plants, air, soil full of poisons? And I don't think anybody in this room here tonight wants that. We didn't want to leave a legacy like that. We wanted to leave a legacy of land, food, soil, air, water without poisons. And we have to do something now, because with GMOs, there is no calling back. You can have a chemical spill. You can have a oil spill. Eventually, you can clean it up. But with GMOs, once it's there, it's over, and there's no calling back. So we don't know, and I've asked scientists all over the world, can it ever be recalled back? And the answer is no. So if a lot of people have said, and initially farmers had said, well, we'll try it for a couple of years. You try it for a couple of years, it's over. Choice is gone. So that's why it's so important not to ever introduce it. You have such a variety of food and plants here in British Columbia, and you will lose that, just like we've lost it in Saskatchewan. That's why we have said no to GMOs now on the prairies. Why do you want to start here? So again, you know, the choice, you still have a choice. We don't have a choice on the prairies on some of the crops I mentioned, soya and also on canola. Our choice is gone. So the decisions you make today will not only affect you today or tomorrow, but forever. So again, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. But you know, I could not have done this alone. If it not have been for my wife, and I had a world army of people backing me. And our job primarily now is to bring awareness to people around the world what has happened with the introduction of GMOs. Many times when I came home, I would think, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night and think, my God, what am I doing to my neighbors? What am I doing to my wife? What am I doing to my children to put them under such tremendous pressure? And many times my wife would say, Percy, don't give up. Stand up for the rights of farmers and continue to do so. If I wouldn't have had that encouragement, I don't think I would be here today. Also, my wife has... My wife is 76 and I'm 77, and we don't know how many good years we got left. We've been relatively blessed with good health, but we have given a commitment, and we gave that commitment also back in 1998. And we said as long as we got life within us, we're going to go down fighting for the rights of farmers, always to be able to use their seeds around the world. Something that really bothered me many times is why my wife has a very deep faith. And many times she said to me when I came home that she felt that she prayed more at night than what she slept. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and God bless. Thank you.